Hello my friends, it is September the 17th of 2023. I'm doing okay. I've been very busy as usual. Been working quite a bit. I have a full-time job that keeps me very busy. Been doing lots of chores around the house here, and of course there's yard work to do, and it's fall time now, so I'm really excited about that. I just love fall so much. It's definitely my favorite season. There's just a certain magic to fall that I just appreciate so much. I just love it. Okay, and been working very hard on my music as well. Been practicing guitar quite a lot and writing the new material for the next Ordo Ab Chao album. So I should be able to start recording the album sometime within the next month or two. So yeah, that'll keep me very busy over the winter months. All right, so yeah, I've been doing okay overall. All right, so this video is entitled Disappointing Albums. Okay, so these will be albums that I consider a disappointment, and these are albums from bands that I actually enjoy quite a lot. These are some of my favorite bands, in fact, and so yeah, these are just albums that I find disappointing. This is entirely subjective, and so yeah, I'll explain to you why I find them to be disappointing. All right, so yeah, let's get right into this video. Up first is Electric Wizard with Wizard, Bloody Wizard. This album came out in 2017, so this is their most recent album. Yeah, they haven't released an album in I guess 6 years now, so it's been quite a while. It's definitely time for them to release another album. And so yeah, when this album came out, I was not impressed all that much. It's okay. It's a decent album. It's but yeah, it's definitely one of their weakest albums, possibly even their weakest. It's yeah, it's not that great. There's a few decent songs, but overall it's just not that great. The reasons being the production is just, to me, it's just lacking. It's lacking heaviness. The guitar tone isn't all that great. The songwriting is okay. There's some memorable aspects to these songs, but yeah, it's just missing that sort of darkness and that sort of drugged out type of sound that Electric Wizard is best known for, and this album is just lacking it. It just does not have that sort of classic Electric Wizard type of feel to it. So yeah, definitely a disappointment, and I know a lot of other Electric Wizard fans feel the same way. And so yeah, it's been many years in my opinion, and I'm sure many other people feel this way as well, that Electric Wizard have not released a good album. It's been such a long time. So yeah, it'd be great if they would release another album sometime soon. It's been a good while. So yeah, all right, so Electric Wizard with Bloody Wizard, Bloody Wizard. Opeth with Watershed. This album came out in 2008. So yeah, up until about this point, I was a big fan of Opeth. I got into Opeth in my mid-teens. I remember listening to Morning Rise and Still Life and Deliverance, and then Ghost Reveries came out, I think, when I was 19, and I just loved that album so much. They were definitely one of my favorite bands, if not my favorite band at that time. And so yeah, I was just really enjoying Opeth so much, and like I said, was a huge fan of them. And then they released this album, and to me it was just such a letdown. To me, this is the beginning of the end for this band. The albums that they've released since this album, to me, I cannot get into it whatsoever. To me, anything past Ghost Reveries is just, it's just unlistenable. I just don't understand why they went into that direction. I mean, it's decent music still. I mean, I'm not saying that it's bad. I mean, certainly their more recent albums are very well written. It's just not for me, and it just does not sound like Opeth. The way Opeth should sound like, in my opinion. But to me, this was the beginning of the end for this band. I don't know, to me this album, you just can't compare it to Ghost Reveries. It's just, you can tell they were just softening their sound and definitely starting to go into a different direction. There's still some heaviness to this album, but yeah, you could tell they were just moving away from that sort of more classic Opeth type of sound. Okay, all right, so Opeth with Watershed. Witchcraft with Nucleus. This album came out in 2016. Okay, so yeah, I'm a big fan of Witchcraft, and love their albums so much, especially their early to mid albums. And so yeah, when they released this album, I don't know, to me it was a bit of a letdown. I still think it's a pretty good album. I'm not saying that it's a bad album, and I was sort of debating having this album even on this list, because actually recently I started listening to this album again, and it is starting to grow on me now. But to me, it's still not comparable to the earlier albums, especially the album that came out prior to this one, which is Legend. This album right here, to me, this album right here is a 10 out of 10. Just absolutely incredible, just mind-blowingly good. And so when they followed it up with this album right here, Nucleus, to me it was just a letdown. I could tell they were starting to go sort of into a different direction. They were trying to go into more of a proggier type of direction, more like lengthier songs and more complex structures, but it's just lacking the memorability. It just doesn't have, to me, this sort of emotional depth that they had on their previous albums. It's just not as catchy either, but like I said, it is starting to grow on me, and I'm starting to think, oh, okay, this is actually a fairly good album. I may change my mind, and it seems like I am starting to change my mind about this album, but still, I just don't think it holds up to the earlier albums, but still a fairly good album. And another Witchcraft album here. This is their most recent album. This is entitled Black Metal. See, I thought they would have come back and had done something to almost redeem themselves, and but to me, this is quite the letdown. In fact, I mean, I can appreciate this album on some level. I mean, it is a very dark and deep and emotional album, but it's not a metal album. It's entirely like acoustic music, like acoustic folk music. It's you know, just acoustic guitar and vocals, fairly simple, straightforward type of stuff, I suppose you could say. Yeah, it's certainly very melancholic sounding. It's good. I can appreciate it on some level. It's not a bad album whatsoever, but to me, I just prefer Witchcraft as being more of a metal band, like a doom metal type of band. And so yeah, and to me, like, I just was disappointed. I was really hoping they would bring back something similar to their earlier albums, but yeah, and they haven't released it. Like, this is their most recent album. This came out in 2020. I don't know if they're coming out with anything else. I haven't heard anything else about Witchcraft for quite some time already, so I really don't know what's happening there, but definitely looking forward to them coming with a new album. I'm not sure if it'll ever happen, but it'd be excellent if it would. Okay. Next up is Wolves in the Throne Room with Celestite. This album came out in 2014. Okay, so this album is not metal at all. It's more like an atmospheric type of... It's hard to explain exactly, because honestly, I barely listened to this album. To me, it's more like soundscapes. It's just very like atmospheric type music. It's not metal. It's hard for me to even explain what it is exactly, but it does not sound like Wolves in the Throne Room. It's definitely different. They definitely went to a different direction on this one, and thankfully they've redeemed themselves, because after this album they came out with Thrice Woven, which is just an incredible album, the 10 out of 10 right here. So yeah, they definitely redeemed themselves, that's for sure. But yeah, this album, I don't know. I mean, it's okay, but you know, I was expecting something like a black metal album. Then they had released this, and to me, I just didn't understand it. It's okay though, but I don't know. I know most Wolves in the Throne Room fans don't really care for it, but yeah, to me, it was just a disappointment at the time, because I knew I would have to wait even that much longer for another album. And but yeah. Anyhow, Wolves in the Throne Room with Celestite. Fear Factory with Transgression. This album came out in 2005. Yeah, years ago, Fear Factory were one of my favorite bands, especially when I was like in my, I guess, like mid to late teens, early 20s. I was definitely a big fan of their music. I was listening to them quite a bit. The album that they came out prior to this album, Archetype, that album was just mind-blowingly good. A very good album, that one. And then they had released this album sometime after Archetype, a few years after that album, and to me this album just seems rushed. It's not a memorable album. The production is just incredibly weak. I mean, normally with Fear Factory you get like a really heavy sound, right? I mean, the drums are just really intense, and the guitars, everything is just heavily compressed, and it just sounds just so intense. But this album just sounds weak to me, and the songwriting here is just, to me it's just not all that memorable. There are a few decent songs in here, but overall it's just, to me, I was just really disappointed with it. In fact, I didn't have this album in my collection. I kept it out of my main collection for the longest time because I was so disappointed with it. And I know this album has a lot of bad reviews as well, but yeah, I don't know what they were thinking with this album. I don't know the circumstances surrounding it, but it just, to me, it seems like I said, it just sounds like a rushed album that they just put out and maybe didn't put a whole lot of work into. To me, that's what it sounds like. It's not the best, that's for sure. Okay, so that is Fear Factory with Transgression. Staying with 14 Shades of Grey. This album came out in 2003. So yeah, up until this point, I was a big fan of Stained. I really liked Dysfunction and Break the Cycle, and then they came out with this one. To me, I could tell they were going to more of a kind of more mainstream rock type of direction. Although, interestingly enough, as of recently, I've really gotten into Stained once again. I've really been listening to them quite a bit. They are actually coming with a new album. I've pre-ordered it already, and I'm enjoying it quite a lot. I purchased two of their other albums, actually the two albums that they came out with after this one, and I've been listening to those ones quite a bit as well. So I might actually change my mind. I certainly need to listen to this album again, but I know for years, many years, and of course I might change my mind now if I start listening to it again, but I know for years I was just disappointed with this album. From what I recall, it's still a fairly decent album, but to me it wasn't comparable to Break the Cycle or Dysfunction, or even their first album, Tormented. To me, it was just kind of lukewarm. It was just kind of going to a bit more of a mainstream type of direction, and were already starting to kind of do that for some time, especially with Break the Cycle. But Break the Cycle is still a fantastic album, but I feel like they kind of went a bit too far into the sort of kind of mainstream hard rock type of direction with this one. So yeah, and like I said, I just lost interest in the band after this, but I've since developed an interest in them once again. But yeah, I'll listen to this one again one of these days, and I might change my mind. I'm sure it is a pretty good album, but anyhow, all right. So that is Staying with 14 Shades of Grey. Mudvayne with Lost and Found. This came out in 2005. Yeah, I was definitely disappointed when this album came out. I really tried to enjoy this album, and I think it is still a fairly good album. There are songs in here that I definitely enjoy. Can't even recall. I haven't listened to this album in ages, but still a fairly decent album, but it's just nowhere near comparable to their album that they came out with previous to this one, which is The End of All Things to Come. That album was just incredibly good, so heavy and just so dark, and lots of very memorable songs in that one, excellent production. And then they came out with this album. I just feel like it just was going into a bit more of a mainstream type of direction. The production is just kind of a little bit weak. The songwriting, you could tell they were just trying to have more sort of like a mainstream sort of pop appeal maybe. And yeah, it just doesn't have that depth that the previous albums had to this one. It's just not as dark either. And so yeah, to me this is sort of where the band started to really go downhill. I haven't listened to any of the albums that they've released since this one right here. So I don't know, I wouldn't mind checking out some of the other albums that they released after this one. But to me this was sort of like the beginning of the end for the band, in my opinion. But who knows? Maybe we'll develop an interest in those other albums one day. We'll see. Okay, so that is Mudvayne with Lost and Found. All right. Ghost with the Prequel. This album came out in 2018. Okay, so yeah, I'm still a big fan of Ghost, but not like I used to be. Their first three albums, these ones right here, this one right here, 10 out of 10, incredible album, so good. And then their second album, which is pretty good. Then the third album, I think this one is just phenomenal as well. And then they come out with Prequel, and to me it doesn't compare whatsoever to their first three albums. It's decent, there are some good songs on here, and I can still appreciate this album. It's not a bad album, it's just, like I said, it's not comparable to their first three albums, but there are some pretty good albums, or songs rather, on this album. So, but to me, I could tell they were just definitely going to a bit more of a pop type of direction, more mainstream, more sort of major key, feel-good type of songs, and yeah, like they just weren't as dark as their earlier albums. But yeah, to me, even their most recent album, I'm not a big fan of that one either. It's still fairly good, and their most recent album is definitely better than this one, but to me their first 3 albums are just their best, and that's probably how I will always feel. Ghost, pretty good band, but I feel like they gone into a direction that I'm not as fond of, but I can still appreciate what they're doing still. But yeah, they're definitely not the same band that they once were. Okay, so that's Ghost with the Prequel. Burzum with Skiptar. This album came out in 2012. Yeah, Burzum, yeah, I can appreciate their music quite a bit. They're not like one of my favorite bands, but I can certainly appreciate the music that Varg has put out. Some of their earlier albums are very good, and then after Varg came out of prison, he came out with 2 very excellent albums, in my opinion. That's Belouse, which is my favorite Burzum album, and then Fallen, which is another fantastic Burzum album. And then he came out with Skiptar after those 2 phenomenal albums. And to me, this album, I could never get into it. It's just lacking in some ways. I just don't know. It's just, the songs just aren't all that memorable to me, and it's just lacking the heaviness. Yeah, to me, this is where I kind of lost interest in Burzum. I haven't purchased any Burzum. Well, that's not true. I have purchased one other album since this one, but yeah, I haven't really kept up on Burzum in many years. And yeah, I could never get into this album. I don't think I've even listened to this album all the way through. It just never really appealed to me. To me, it's just not all that great. But who knows? Maybe one day it'll grow on me. But for now, to me, it was a disappointment. But yeah. All right, so that is Burzum with Skiptar. And the last album on my list, this is an album that's legendary for being a big disappointment for so many people, and I'm sure you know what I'm talking about right here. It's a very well-known album. Okay, this is Metallica with Saint Anger. This album came out in 2003. So when this album came out, I believe I was 16 or 17 years old. Of course, I was a big Metallica fan at the time, and Metallica were the band that really got me into metal, along with a few other bands. And then us fans were waiting many years for a new album from Metallica, because the album prior to this would have been, I guess, Reload, although they did release Garage Inc., but that was just a covers album. So yeah, we have been waiting many years for a new full-length album with new material, and then we got this one, which yeah, what a disappointment. I mean, the production obviously is just strange. The songwriting is not the greatest, although there are some very good songs in here. There are a couple of very good ones, like the first couple of songs like Frantic and Saint Anger. There may be 1 or 2 other ones, but overall it was a letdown, a big disappointment for myself and so many other people. But yeah, this album it's pretty legendary for being a big disappointment, and lots of other people have their opinions about this album. All right, so that's Metallica with Saint Anger. Okay, so these are some albums that I find to be disappointing from some of my favorite bands. Okay, so you may think differently. Maybe these are some albums that you enjoy, and that's perfectly fine. This is entirely subjective. Okay, so let me know some albums that you find to be disappointing from bands that you love. I'm very curious to know. So yeah, please leave some comments. I'm always curious to know what you guys think. If there are some bands or albums you think I should check out, please let me know. Leave any kind of comments. I appreciate anything, and please, if you could give me a thumbs up, I'd like that. And if you don't subscribe to my channel, please subscribe. Okay, so I want to say thank you very much for watching, and I want to say thanks to all the people who watch my videos and subscribe to my channel. I really truly appreciate it. Take care, my friends. Cheers.